Here's Parks Associates' SmartTechCheck podcast with Mark Vena.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vena, leader of the Parks Associates Smart Home Research Practice, and welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all consumer tech topics that are smart home automation, security, and console gaming related, and much, much more. Today is Wednesday, September 21st, 2021. It's a big week this week, as it always is in technology, and we've got some really interesting, actually a bit far out topics to talk about this week. And with that, let me bring up my usual partners in crimes here. I've got Stewart Wolpin, who is the writer for Twice and Techlicious, Rob Pegoraro, who writes for USA Today, Fast Company, and Wirecutter. And I'm going to use a different word this week for John Quain. I called Stewart, I think, irrepressible last week. I'll say that you're irrepressible, John. Because you are.
We take turns every week.
Yes, being irrepressible is a tough act to follow every week. John is actually a writer for the New York Times and writes for a number of other periodicals, including Tom's Guide. But guys, thank you for joining me for today's podcast. This one will be a little bit. Some of the topics are a little bit interesting, I think, in my opinion. But welcome to the podcast. And how are you guys doing this today? Anything new in your lives, Stewart? I think you're down in Washington, if I'm not mistaken.
I am in our nation's capital. I'm switching places with the president, who's in my town of New York.
In New York, right? Hand off.
Oh boy, you're switching places.
I really wanted to keep the traffic on the east side.
He didn't leave you the football, though, right?
I hope the nuclear football has a better password scheme than many of the software schemes that you see on today's smart home devices, but that's a different discussion. Rob, you're at home, aren't you?
I'm in Arlington, Virginia, just across the Potomac River, and it's a day where I've been struggling with Wi-Fi issues, which makes it a day ending in Y.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know. New Mac Mini, it's great. It either it doesn't like my router, or the router doesn't like the computer, and so. Fortunately, I never threw away the old router, so that's plugged in on the floor, and there's an Ethernet cable running from that to the desktop right here.
Did you broke down and you went an M1 Mac Mini?
So what finally got me to do it was, first of all, seeing our old friends B&H Photo Video in Manhattan knock $100 off the price, and then Apple finally started selling the very convenient Touch ID keyboard. So I could finally use biometric security instead of typing in.
I might have a sale there because it wasn't supported on anything outside that iMac, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they weren't selling it separately. They started selling it on a standalone basis sometime in August, I guess. And so,
oh wow,
that led me to decide. I think my wife is tired of me swearing at the computer. I should do something about that.
Wow, I did not know that. I may join you and purchase one of those bad boys. Anyway, John, how are you? How are things going with you?
Today, so I'm in the usual Manhattan, ensconced here. No trouble with Wi-Fi. Hopefully today, knock on wood.
Well, without any further ado, I'm sure Wi-Fi will probably come up during the call. It always comes up in anything.
Yes, when it knocks me offline.
Yeah, exactly. Oh boy, so let's bring up the first topic here. And that is, and what lead into that? Home networking, Wi-Fi extenders, and purchase intention. And without going into a lot of, we do a lot of research on this particular topic, and we're finding in Parks Associates that the interest in enhancing people's home networks has gone up dramatically over the last. It's been on a tear for the last several years, but it's been particularly on a tear over the last year. Go figure. People are working at home more frequently. They're spending more time, and they're looking for convenient ways to upgrade the coverage in their homes. So this is a stat. We have the data broken down, but this is the combined stat of data in terms of people's purchase intention levels. They haven't purchased anything yet, but they're intending to purchase at a disproportionate level for both Wi-Fi routers, extenders, and even new routers and mesh routers, by the way, are in this category as well. I cannot believe this shocks you, John, to see data like this.
Right. No, I mean, this is sort of like the cable companies and the cellular companies and used car salesmen. nobody's happy with their Wi-Fi connection. So any improvement that you're going to promise them is going to be something that they're going to go for probably. Yeah, I have some actually Netgear equipment I have to return that I've been testing for a while, and Wi-Fi 6, and it actually is a significant improvement. It has made things more stable by and large, and juggling a lot of smart devices and stuff. So I can see why, and so far so good. It does seem to be an improvement.
Stewart.
You mentioned it. What percentage of those are mesh networks? Because it would seem to me that most people who are literally homeowners, people who actually own homes, would be far better off with a mesh network. But I don't know whether or not the industry or the individual manufacturers have been able to differentiate their products in such a way that consumers know what a mesh system even is as compared to an extender. And certainly I don't count on the salesman at your local Best Buy to be able to explain the difference either. So I'm curious as to both what percentage of that is mesh network, what percentage of that is Wi-Fi 6, and whether or not the companies are doing anything to really boost the marketing presence of mesh networks, which would seem to me to be the far superior solution for most homeowners.
Well, I can tell you, because I'm presenting some data tomorrow on one of our virtual events that we're conducting on, by the way, on home networking and Wi-Fi tomorrow, that I want to say 32. It's either I think it's 32 or 33% of the people we polled. We poll 10,000 people every quarter. Have a net. This is ownership. Have a Wi-Fi mesh, whole home mesh network system, which that leaves 68% of the market still wide open for people who have upgraded. And by the way, I violently agree with what you're saying. I think mesh is the most inaccurate, misleading word of all time for the average consumers. They don't get it. I've had Orbeez for the last several years, and I love them. Every time they upgrade to a new wireless standard they were at AC, now they're at Wi-Fi 6. I've got a call with them next week. I'm sure they're upgrading to 6E eventually. There's a whole conversation we can have about Wi-Fi protocol fatigue because it's too many letters or confusing people. But I agree with you that the mesh routers, for anyone who has one in their home, especially if it's an older home, which with old construction, old materials in the walls, it can be mind-blowing in terms of the coverage improvements you can get. I mean, Rob, do you have a? We were talking before the recording started that you're having some issues with your router and your brand spanking
Wi-Fi 6 router, but I also live in a very old home that's 101 years old. So yes, lots of walls. This wall to my left is actual drywall, but mostly it's lath, slats, and plaster. So it has certain degrading properties on RF networking sometimes. So yeah, I'm puzzling it through one thing at a time. One thing I'd want to know, that maybe you can put this in your next quiz: how long do people keep their existing wireless routers?
Do you know we believe it or not, Parks has data on that, and I don't have that at my fingertips, but I want to say routers are in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 years. It's relatively, and I think that's probably, remember, if the average is 4 or 5 years, that means there are people who've had them for 8 or 9 years and people like me who upgrade, at the drop of a hat. But routers are one of those things. And I'm sure all of you have experienced when I love going to gyms and, I'll log on with routerlogin.net, because nobody knows any better. and it's always fascinating to me how some of these gyms will have very old routers because they just don't want to upgrade them, and they haven't updated the firmware in years. And by the way, the router companies don't want you to upgrade the firmware because there's too many opportunities for problems if that happens. But the nice thing about the mesh routers and probably more expansively, this concept of managed Wi-Fi, where you buy a solution from Plume, for example, which they have Wi-Fi 6 mesh pods, and they manage all that stuff in the background. You don't have to think about upgrading firmware. They control everything. Of course, they charge a subscription fee for that capability. But more and more service providers, of course, are doing that because they want the revenue, and they think they can do a better job of managing your home network than you probably can.
Well, I think there's another issue that needs to be addressed. My mother-in-law just had AT&T bring her a new router. And I'm on the phone with her trying to explain, and I don't think that even most average people understand, forget mesh. Most people, average people, don't understand what the difference between a router and a modem is. And the cable companies are of no help. They center the router with no instructions whatsoever. And so she has no idea what's going on, what to plug and what to unplug, how difficult or easy it is, not a clue. And she's going to have a technician come out and do it, which is, to me, considering the utilitarian, the utility-like nature of this, is insanity to me that this technology remains so mysterious to people, to everybody who now requires it.
John, a question for you, because you're in an apartment in New York, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Right, I am right now. Yeah.
Do you think that you need a mesh router, or you think that's overkill for an apartment?
I need a mesh router. I mean, if I was in, I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment, but it's, again, this building is 110 years old or something like that, and at least, and its walls are actually really thick, and there's a lot of interference. Some of the rooms are built like a Faraday cage, right? They've got wire and God knows what in those walls. So, actually, my experience has been I've needed to have mesh networks, and I've installed them in my previous apartment too, for the same reason. And I have them in my house, because the distance is such that you need it. But in this case, there's just a lot of interference.
Well, that's a great point, because old construction may be charming, but it's not particularly friendly for Wi-Fi coverage. But the other point you just made, John, is that people have that now the smart home is really expanding beyond just your physical residence. You've got devices with cameras in the back that are overseeing the driveway and the perimeter of your property, and you may be able to get power there, but you're out of luck, of course, if you can't get a good, reliable internet connection. So the mesh routers come in very handy. And again, I tend to plug Orbi, because the Netgear solution, because I've been using them for years, and there's several good brands out there, but Orbi's pretty good. And you could get incredible coverage. You buy 2 or 3 of those satellites, and you might get 5,000 or 6,000 square feet of coverage, which is pretty big. But let's flip on to the first topic. And if I recall, Rob, was this you who teed this up, or was it Stewart?
Well, I hope I was not the only one to suggest it.
Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely a hot topic. Apple and Google bowing. I changed the language because I did not want to offend either of those companies. I'm that type of guy. No, but they really did. No, but it's true though. I mean, this smart voting app thing, which and this is the thing, honestly, that infuriates me about big tech, is that they opine on being we're for fundamental human rights, of which voting certainly is a fundamental human right, I think, in many respects. And then all of a sudden, guess what? We're going to blow this app up because we don't want to alienate the Russians. And there's other manifestations of this. This is not the only time this has happened. But I want to, Rob, let me flip it up to you, because I'm sure you've got a strong point of view on this.
Yeah. So the backstory here is this was an app created by the opposition group led by Alexei Navalny, the dissident who is now in jail, possibly for the rest of his life, which basically attempted to coordinate voting to basically suggest to people, look, of the candidates that the ruling party is allowing to run, this one is most likely to win and beat out the anointed candidates. Everybody to vote for this person. And so it's something where you do need to have some sort of collective action and intelligence. And apparently this is what you'd want to do, because the website Navalny was using for that was already blocked. The Russian government did not take kindly to this, and apparently directly threatened both Apple and Google with arrests of their employees in Russia, which, yes, I get it. There are business complications. That said, first of all, with Apple, this is the completely predictable consequence of having the App Store be the only way for widespread distribution of software on an iPhone. It guarantees, it's a choke point that any two-bit authoritarian in the world, in a country in which Apple does business, is going to want to seize control of that. We've seen it in China, so totally not surprising. Android, at least you can install things off the Play Store. There is that. You could sideload it. What I want to know that both these companies are doing is, that they had, certainly Google has thought long and hard about what do we do about China? And their answer is to not do business. They were considering it. There was a project to launch a search engine just for the People's Republic, and they backed off on that because their own employees didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Apple doesn't have that luxury since where their iPhone's getting made, China. With Russia, it is not as important to both these companies. So I'd want to know, what are they doing to reduce their leverage to whatever stupid thing Vladimir Putin wants them to do to prop up his worthless regime. And I also want them to, Apple's response in a case like this is to say nothing, which is the least helpful thing Apple could do.
Right.
I guess is giving background comments, but at some point they need to say that, say what it is that is going on, because we all know it. And just whistling past the graveyard of Russian democracy is not really, they're not going to cover themselves with honor that way.
Well, when you make tough statements like this at a CEO level, which I think is what you're essentially saying, because those words carry weight, you have to be prepared to say, you know what, we're not going to do business in this country, and not many companies are prepared to do that. In fact, I can't think of really any companies. There are some companies that will refuse to do business in places that they don't find.
Facebook, I have to give them grudging respect since they've decided. China, no. Yes, it's 1 billion people. We love to have them, but it's just not worth it.
Right. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, the same issues. Companies like Yahoo have had trouble for years in China and other places. And look, some of these issues have led to people actually, dying, being killed for this, information and stuff that's out there. It's not just banning some, but also divulging information to these governments. This is certainly a problem. And Rob's right about Apple just trying to pretend it's not happening. It's just even worse than, it's kind of the Tesla approach to it. We don't have the technology. We'll just pretend like we have it. But it's a serious problem for them. I mean, if Putin, it's not even the Russian government, it's a single person. If that person just wants something off there, they just take it off there. That's a problem for those companies. Absolutely.
Stewart, I'll give you the last word.
Word.
Words.
Word. I think Apple's between a rock and a hard place here. I mean, any public company obviously has their first responsibility is to their shareholders. And this is not to defend Apple. They need a creative solution to deal with this. They're at the mercy, to a certain extent, not only of the threats from the Russian government to prosecute individual Apple employees, but you have to remember, Russia also passed a law declaring that party to be a terrorist organization. And so they have to abide by local laws, just like they have to abide by local law in the United States. So I think what's necessary here is much more of a creative solution, but I don't think that these companies can do this on their own. I think the Googles, the Apples, and all of these other companies that operate, Microsoft, that operate in these totalitarian states, need to come together to figure out something, because individually, just because Google has decided not to do business in China, is not going to impact China one bit. Their software people have created their own operating systems, and they're not having any problem. I think it's all of these companies would have to come together. And whether with Facebook and Microsoft and Apple and all of these tech giants, instead of operating individually and making their own decisions, I think they all need to get together and decide how they're going to deal with these totalitarian states, because together they might have a lot more power than they right now have to tout out as individual companies.
Yeah.
And one other thing, CSAM. Apple's plan to stop the distribution of child sex abuse material, not by scanning stuff uploaded to its own computers, but when it's right on your own device. And Apple has said, we will resist if any government said, take this tool and use it to scan for other things. Did Apple resist a lot here? That's a problem. It's one thing when you can say, this thing you want us to do, we can't. The technology doesn't exist. It's another one. Well, yeah, it's here, but it's not for that purpose.
Well, and also you have to remember they didn't do a heck of a lot about meddling in our elections either with the disinformation campaigns. And the FSB continues to do these disinformation campaigns about vaccines and foment as much dissent as they can, not only in the United States, but in other countries. And when you're silent about that too, and then you take down an app, Apple has more money than God. There's no reason why they shouldn't just say, you know what, we're not taking it down. We'll get our employees out of there. We'll do it all remotely.
What if they just gave Vladimir Putin just handing out billions of dollars until he would just leave, fly him out? He's got to have a prize, right?
No, I think
they've got a $100 billion sitting around.
We know what they are. Now we're just discussing price.
Yeah, I mean, it is like the sustainability issue, though, too. All these companies have all jumped on the climate change sustainability aspect, and they have sustainability officers that work for their companies, and they spend a lot of money on that. And this is a similar kind of issue in terms of they need, an ethics officer, what they do in countries that have these rules. Do they keep the app on? Do they deny it? What do they do about India? What happens when that government changes and they decide they don't like certain things in the App Store? They need to spend a lot more time and effort, I think, on that, just as they are for sustainability.
Well, again, we could talk about this topic forever because I think we all have very common. I think we're all, we might come at this in different ways, but I think all of us have really strong views on this. And I mean, I don't know. I suspect we'll be talking about this again in a few weeks. In some other there'll be some other manifested topic in the news. And guess what? We were talking about this a few weeks ago. Right. Let us tee up the next topic. John, this is for you because you've been the Starlink guy. We did this specifically for you. And I actually changed the language of this topic a little bit because I really do think there's a lot of folks looking at Starlink as a potential answer to people who are having difficulty, particularly people who are in remote areas or in places where it's just not easy to get reliable internet access. But you've been using it for some time, if I'm not mistaken. What's been your experience, and do you think it's the real deal?
My experience has been very mixed. I've been using it since February. Granted, if you're closer to the 49th parallel, your results will probably be better than mine have been because they're still clustered. They don't have enough satellites up there yet in these low Earth orbit satellites. And they have not solved some of the problems they have with their earthbound stations. So what happens is it gets communicated down, obviously, to data centers and things on the planet Earth, and then it gets bounced around. And that's where they have some serious problems with these millisecond dropouts. And those millisecond dropouts foil any attempt to do something like this, which is like a video conferencing. Starlink can't do that yet. So it was funny because recently some of my editors said, hey, that Starlink that you've been talking about and reviewing and writing about, should we just finalize it because it's a final product? And I said, no, it's not a final product. I know it seems like forever that it should be by now a final product, but it's not a final product. When he dropped that online that, in October, we're going to, it's not going to be beta anymore, I was shocked. I was totally shocked. So, because just this weekend, we were trying to stream like the, they call it football there, but soccer games that were going on. We were trying to stream that online, and Starlink kept dropping it. So it's not ready for prime time. But neither is the self-driving software, far from being ready for prime time, and that isn't going to stop them either, apparently. So we'll see.
Rob, do you have a view on that?
So I wrote the sort of cryptic next month Elon Musk tweet. Replied to some Canadian gamer who the day before had complained on Twitter that his Starlink terminal had not arrived yet. And so what does it mean for Starlink to exit beta? Nobody knows. Does it mean they will more clearly define the speeds you'll get? Will they change the price? Will they clarify, like formally renounce having a data cap or implement one? Nothing. I emailed SpaceX PR. Weirdly enough, they did not answer me about that. But the thing is, people are pinning a lot of hope on this because in some places there is no other option. I was reading a story in the Rappahannock News. Rappahannock County, Virginia is way to the southwest of me. Lovely countryside. And it was recounting how the schools have been setting up some families with Starlink terminals because those people don't even have cell service. So it's this or nothing. And so you have to hope that upgrades, like, for instance, right now they're at about 1,600 of these little nano satellites. Their FCC authorization clears them for 4,400 to build out the constellation. Part of it is allowing them to sort of mesh network. Here we go again. Form a mesh network in orbit with laser beam links. Sounds cool, huh? And that way you sort of get aside the problems of having to bounce things from orbit to the ground and back. The satellites can talk to each other and hopefully allow for a more consistent service. Because I've talked to enough rural broadband advocates who don't expect great things out of it, but they still think that it's going to be something like this, if not Starlink, OneWeb, or Project Kuiper, the Amazon project for another low Earth orbit constellation of broadband satellites, that is going to have to fill in, cover that last 1 to 3% where nothing else works right now.
Yeah, and that's true. What Rob just said, I forgot to mention that in Vermont, for example, there is no cellular service. There is no cable or optical line, although the timing of this is interesting too, because there was a lot of money put out for infrastructure projects for rural areas. And it just so happens right about now in Vermont, in these areas, they're stringing lines and digging cables and dropping some of that cable now finally. So maybe Starlink is feeling the pressure of some of these projects, like, oh, we better get it out there before the cable gets hooked up and other competition happens. But yeah, it's also, don't get me wrong, it is fast often. You know, we're talking 250 megabits per second. It's just, it has all these hiccups that prevent it from being a really good solution to a lot of people.
But it's just 250 down. What kind of speeds do you get out? You only get what, 25?
30, 40 up, it depends.
Better than a lot of cable systems. Actually, pretty much all cable systems.
Yeah, it's not bad at all. But again, you know, it's these millisecond dropouts that they have the problem with and they haven't resolved. And they've sent us emails saying they're going to resolve it. As to what it means by going out of beta, Rob, I think what it means is I won't be allowed to send it back.
Put it on your schedule C.
Yeah, so I'm like hoping the cable company, they just were laying some lines. I'm like, they're racing trying to beat Starlink. Will they get it connected before I can send my Starlink back? We'll see.
Stewart, your thoughts?
Well, I have one superfluous thought and one more serious thought. The first surplus, when I started hearing about Starlink and all of these issues, all I could think of was, how did they do communications on Star Trek on planet that had like no technology at all? They touch their chest and yet they can communicate with a starship in upper Earth orbit. And it just started to occur to me that they're making up technology like they did the transporter, but that's totally off topic. Release 17 of the 5G standard is supposed to include specifications for satellite cellular connectivity. And even more advanced than that, just read a recent paper detailing what 6G is supposed to be. And 6G is going to be a gigantic step forward. It's a whole different platform, but part of it is what they're calling ubiquitous connectivity, which includes LEO, MEO, and GEO satellite communications. So the next generation of cellular connection, which is supposed to start happening in 2030, I mean, they're developing it now, obviously, but it's supposed to be where 5G is now in about 2030. The only issue that springs to my mind with that kind of that connectivity ubiquity, where satellites are not only a major part of the network, but could be the primary part of the 6G network, is the sky pollution that we're all talking about. And all that garbage in space are going to put all of these satellites up in orbit. And apparently, LEO at least, is just so crowded. I mean, it doesn't look crowded when you're up there, but there's all these nuts and bolts flying around up there. So I think they're going to not only have to have a major effort to get satellites up there, but they're also going to have a multinational effort to clean up what's up there already, because you don't want things flying into these hundreds, if not thousands, of satellites that might be up there in the next decade or so.
Right, we're already at several thousand now.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, every time they launch them, they want to put them on the larger rocket too, so they can launch like several hundred all at once.
Yep.
There's a 2% failure rate for Starlink. So 2% of all of those satellites, the minute they get up there, are dead. And so there's basically space junk, and that's regarded as a really excellent failure.
Yes, that is true. That's not a bad failure rate when it comes to satellites.
They have, though, they're actually low enough 340 miles. So the first Starlink satellites have already re-entered. So this is not if you're getting up to like 500 miles or 700 where it's going to be there for a while. This is something where if you read through the FCC authorizations for Starlink and other constellations, a lot of it is, yes, are you going to clean up after yourself? Will you make sure that these things are designed to deorbit themselves? And if they can't deorbit themselves for whatever reason, they will not stick around for too long.
Well, I think that's why the 6G people are plotting for MEO and geosynchronous, which is 10 times as high, where the skies aren't quite so crowded all day.
And to paraphrase another Star Trek character, Scotty, you cannot break the laws of physics. Geosynchronous orbit is never going to do anything for very fast responsive communications because you've got 44,000 miles of latency from that round trip from Earth.
Well, I think they're talking about bouncing them off other satellites in lower orbit. I don't think they're talking about geosynchronous with a direct link.
Yeah.
Well, hey guys, we got 2 more topics to talk about.
5G working. Halfway right.
We got 2 more topics to talk about, but I saw that, Stewart. We got 2 more topics to talk about, but I just make a warning. When a marketing person uses the word ubiquitous in any conversation about any piece of technology, you're in trouble. Let me just say
it wasn't a marketing person. It was an engineer.
That's even scarier.
Okay.
Anyway, let's flip to the next topic. And it's a good segue to this topic. And why I say about, everybody's talking about all these recent, call them stunts, with Elon Musk, with Jeff Bezos, which are, basically flights up and flight back. Commercial space travel to me, it's a much more practical matter than some of these, demos essentially that are happening, have been happening over the last couple of months. And, I look at, the opportunity where I see commercial space travel happening is the ability to go from, let's say, in lower Earth orbit, from London to Japan in an hour and a half versus 27 hours, because the craft of that can travel at incredible speeds versus conventional commercial flights. But Stuart, let me start with you. I mean, do you really think we're getting ahead of ourselves here, or do you think that? I mean, I know there's baby steps involved before we get to that vision where commercial space travel is a real thing in terms of it's really just a form of transportation more than anything else. But what are your thoughts on the whole commercial space travel thing?
Well, first of all, the fact that we're having space travel at all, and that I still hear noises, we could be spending that money more wisely elsewhere. And I've never understood that argument, considering the benefits that space technology has brought here on Earth. We would not have the iPhone without the space program.
Not the moon landing.
Well,
I agree with that.
So that's the first thing.
Absolutely true.
The second thing is all things that start out as very rare. For instance, when Columbus crossed the ocean blue, it was just the sailors and the explorers. And before you had the Mayflower, and then you had steamship. So all of these things, you cannot look at these in the context of only this moment. This is a beginning. It's funny that we have all of these science fiction films where you have people going into space. We didn't have that. You didn't have movies when Columbus crossed predicting that we would soon be sending settlers over, on steamship and all of that sort of stuff. So this is a foothold. And I think looking out 50 years from now, people will look back on this as that was the start, and here we are now. This is solving technology problems. It's solving the problems of the cost problems. Any new consumer technology that ever comes out there, obviously, it's a very high price, and it'll be the same with this. And eventually, as it becomes, you'll excuse the word, more ubiquitous, it will be, prices will come down as they do for all things. I mean,
Stuart, listen, I agree with that. I agree with that. I want to bring Robin in a second, but the only observation I'll make, I think the reason why it's getting a bit of a bad name is that these initial flights are being flown on by multi-billionaires, and the way it's come. No, hold on for 1 second. The way it's being, I think, perceived by the American population or by the population in general is that these billionaires spending a bunch of money for a thrill that they would never otherwise be able to experience.
I think that it's good that they're doing it because they're showing that it's safe. if they're willing to do it themselves. I don't think that people understand how dangerous this has been perceived. Remember Apollo 1.
Right.
So the fact that these guys not only are paying for it, but are willing to take the risk and showing people, if I'm willing to do it, it's okay, as opposed to just sending up astronauts or brave people. I think this whole thing demonstrates that what they're trying to demonstrate is that it's not as dangerous as it used to be or is perceived to be. There is still very fresh on the mind the Columbia disaster and all sorts of things like that. So I think their going up is bridging a huge gap between is it safe and is it not safe, and I think that shortens that kind of safety credibility gap.
So, Rob, if I could give you a gift card for SpaceX, would your family let you go on the next flight?
Yes. If you may not recognize over my shoulder, there is a picture of the second to last space shuttle launch. To its left, right, whichever direction. There's a Lego model of the International Space Station. I'm a card-carrying space nut. And I think it is a very good thing that we're making this not just the property of governments. That's not to say we're immediately going to flip the switch and, be like the opening early scenes of 2001: A Space Odyssey's taking the Pan Am space shuttle. But by the same token,
you're going to Howard Johnson's on the space
right, on the
station.
Commercial air travel, it wasn't like suddenly a big 1.0 and then 2.0. We went from the Wright brothers to Charles Lindbergh in the Spirit of St. Louis to Pan Am, and now you're flying across the Atlantic and it's routine. Mm-hmm. It was bit by bit, step by step, and this is the same thing that's happening, and it will happen faster. Mm-hmm. If it is not, we're not waiting on NASA to sign a gigantic procurement contract with Boeing, who can then, deliver like the Space Launch System rocket, which is now years and years late and billions of dollars over budget. And I like the fact that it's some American entrepreneurs making this happen.
But you didn't answer my question, Rob. Would you go on? And I'm being very serious.
Yeah.
Would you go if you had the opportunity?
So the Virgin Galactic, that's interesting. They really got their wrists slapped in a way that's going to leave a mark by the Federal Aviation Administration, because they didn't document the fact that they had to divert from their flight path. They left the plane envelope of that test where Sir Richard Branson got to fly suborbital and see the Earth's curvature from 50 miles up. And that's really bad. Like, if you don't have a functioning safety culture where you document what goes wrong, right, so you don't do it again, you are going to get people killed. Mm-hmm. But SpaceX, the Falcon 9 rocket has got an outstanding safety record. The Dragon capsule, same thing. And even Blue Origin, where they've yet to actually put any objects in orbit, but they do seem to have been taking the time to get it right with their rocket and their booster. And, I don't actually have the scratch to afford a ticket right now. And these companies are returning my queries about press passes. So let's see how that works out.
Well, Rob, Christmas is coming, and I'll make sure I remember that when right. I think about the president. I need to get you for doing all these podcasts with us. John, your final thoughts on this topic?
No, I would go too. I would go in a second, in a heartbeat. I think it's a fascinating progress is being made. It still seems like inexorably slow progress, but we're still not back on the moon again. And I think about all the things when we were kids. We were going to be on Mars and beyond by this time. I mean, why is it taking us so long? But no, I think it is great progress. I think it is a useful way to spend that money as well. In terms of getting the technology forward and making it more of a regular thing. And I do think, that Stewart's right, that it does show, hey, it is safe if I'm willing to do that. What's going to be interesting is sort of what spawned this. Is it a viable thing to do a commercial operation? And I know when they started doing this, they thought they would sell seats for about $250 million, something like that. I think they're up to 450. So we're talking like, $500 million or something for a seat on one of these. But there'll be people who have that money and who are going to be willing to pay it. I bet they'll sell every seat they can for a while.
Well, I'll be happy just going on Space Mountain at Disney World. Okay. That's the kind of guy that I am. But this is a closing point on this. I think the point that Rob made is a very salient one, and that is the whole that's what's been remarkable for the last 10 years, call it 15 years, is that all this activity has been funded by the private sector. And I think the private sector approaches this in a much cost-effective, actually, have got great track records. If you look at the commercial aviation business in this country, not space travel, of course, but the aviation business, now we have an enviable track record, despite the fact that people do die from time to time in plane crashes and things like that. We have organizations like the FAA, which is a government agency that works in tandem with the private sector, and the track record is unapproachable, frankly, in comparison to other forms of transportation. And the last plug that I'll make in, because it's, if you haven't seen For All Mankind, that Apple series that addresses this topic specifically, what would have happened had we continued and not stopped with the moon landing, and we didn't take that kind of long break for about 20 years. So let's hit the last topic, and I'll bring us back to Earth. The topic you love that pun. iOS 15 and iPadOS 15 is out this week. I downloaded yesterday, and I didn't have any problems. Want to just get your quick couple 30 seconds reactions. I mean, first of all, do you guys upgrade right away, or do you wait? Hey, let me wait a week to see there's no gremlins in there before you do upgrade, because after all, it is your phone. And if you have, and I think Rob, you were having some issues, I think, with your experience. Correct? I think I saw a tweet from you that.
So not with the update. So I did install iPadOS 15 on my iPad Mini 5. Basically, I waited a whole several hours to make sure there weren't people complaining that their devices had caught fire or anything. So the install was the usual process where you're waiting forever while iPadOS kind of chooses its cut and repairs the update and installs it. But overall, so, I'm a neatnik. I'm really fussy about my app grade. And this stupid update has completely screwed it up. It's shoved random widgets in here.
Yeah.
Which, by default, it's stuck a one-by-one calendar widget where I can see one update, one event on it. What's the point? Show me what else is on the calendar. It's got this weird grid where there's this negative space on either side. It's I think a 6x4 grid instead of 6x6. So I'm wasting pixels for some reason. There are parts of it that are nice. It's nice that we actually have home screen widgets on the iPad, which we did not before. I have the app library, which for some reason didn't make the cut. I have the Translate app, which for another reason we just couldn't put on the iPad before. I still don't know why Apple can't ship a weather app and a calculator app for the iPad, because I guess it's really hard. Just give me a big version of the iPhone one. Don't ever think the problem. And otherwise, still sort of figuring out what I like and don't like. The new Safari interface, it's taken some getting used to. On the other hand, it seems less. It seems to have cut back on trying to force me into a multi-window environment when it just doesn't work that well on an iPad. The old Safari was constantly opening pages into a new window and then forgetting about it. And you get to the point where you tap and hold the Safari icon, show all windows, and you've got 4 of these little orphan windows stuck on the screen that you didn't know were there. So that seems to be progress. Otherwise, still making my way around it. I am going to have to spend probably 2 hours painstakingly dragging these app icons so I can finally make sense of things and not get lost.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about these mobile operating system upgrades by Apple, or these new releases, I should say, too, because this fits into the new release. There's so many features they pack in there. You don't really, and they try to do a decent job of discoverability with all alerts and notifications, especially when you install for the first time. But I'll be alerted to things that I didn't know it had until I'm a month into using it, and that's a challenge. Stewart, your thoughts on the whole upgrade experience? Are you one of those guys that jump in?
They released the upgrade while I was on the Amtrak coming down here. So I upgraded. I didn't have my iPad to upgrade. I only had my phone upgrade. And it took about an hour to download the upgrade, which I was very surprised about. It may be just the corporate network that I'm on, but it took a while. Just real briefly, and most of the stuff looks fine. I like the look of the new maps. And the maps seem a lot more detailed than they did before. I'm not sure that I like the address bar in Safari being at the bottom of the page instead of the top of the page. Yeah. That's going to take a little getting used to, and I'm not sure I understand the logic behind that. But I do like when they want to show you the different pages that you have open. Instead of it being sort of like a Rolodex slide deck, it's now a grid. I don't know if that's something that you can control or not. I also like the fact that in mail, you can now set it so you can have privacy, so it doesn't display your ISP or your email address, which I thought was interesting. I have to look into more of that. So there's a lot of, apparently they've added a lot of other privacy things into, they upgraded me free to iCloud Plus, even though I was already paying for it. But that seems to have some additional privacy features. They didn't explain how they work. They just said that they're there. So I'm still exploring, but it looks like that there's a lot of positive stuff. There's some nagging negative stuff, but all in all, usually when they, it just seems that what I opened up one screen that said you could do this if you do that, if you do this, and I'm reading these instructions and I'm going, I think I know what I'm doing, but I have no idea what this means.
John, let me give you the last word.
Sure. I'm like, don't do it. Don't upgrade yet. That's my first recommendation. Whenever anybody asks me that, that's been my recommendation since DOS 3.0. I mean,
oh boy. Now you've dated yourself.
Real people. I mean, I use my phone here now. One of the things I'm doing is studying bioethics at New York University. As a graduate program there. So I need to have a vaccination pass every single day, renewed every single day, to show them on my phone to get into school, right? To get into class. And now that's become an essential thing. So honestly, upgrading the OS, unless you have to because you're a professional like we are, I'd say wait to do that because there are bound to be some issues inevitably. But I sort of agree with Stewart too. I have put it on non-essential things. I don't actually need the device. So if it crashes, and the address bar on the bottom of the browsers, Firefox does that on Android, but it drives me crazy. It's like, look, I picked up a book because I wanted to see how the book did it. It's always at the top. You put it at the top. There's a reason you put it at the top. Anyway, but there are some new features. But wait. Don't rush into this.
See, I use that strategy. I do subscribe to the beta program, for the Apple upgrades, and I would never put those on a production system. Right. I mean, I've got so much stuff at home that I have a backup system that, if it blows up, it blows up. I'm not going to upgrade until I absolutely have to. And I had a nasty experience with a Mac a couple of years ago. And it may have been my fault for all I know, is that I made the upgrade and it bricked the unit. And I had to go through a very extensive procedure. Now, fortunately, I had a backup. I had a time machine backup, so it didn't, cost me, so to speak, from a data loss standpoint. But let me tell you something. There are sometimes that can scare the bejesus out of you, frankly, when you upgrade and all of a sudden nothing fires up on the screen. But
right.
Well, guys, this has been great. Listen, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. As always, John, Stewart, and Rob, for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Please visit Parks Associates at www.parksassociates.com. And until next time, have a great week here on Earth. I'll talk to you guys later.